Welcome to the Lore of the South.
Did you know, in 1944, Miami Beach pharmacist and airman Benjamin Green was looking for a way to protect himself and fellow soldiers from the hot Florida sun. He first used a substance called Red Vet Pet. It was a thick jelly and foul-smelling, but it did the trick and prevented sunburn. Soon Green began adding cocoa butter and coconut oil to his concoction, which much improved the smell and spreadability. That's when Coppertone came knocking and began to mass market the suntan lotion. Hey y'all, welcome to the Lore of the South podcast. I'm Kelly, your host. In the words of Jimmy Fallon, you're here, you made it. It's the first episode. We're doing this. I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts, and most of them are probably of the paranormal genre, history, and one of them is the New England Legends podcast. Obviously, New England has a lot of history and a lot of legends, but you know who else has a lot of history and a lot of legends? Well, the South. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to cover Southern legends, Southern ghost stories, Southern cryptids, some Southern trivia. I have what I call Jeopardy brain. Like, I may not remember where my sunglasses are, but I can pull some trivia out of my rear. And I would like to share some of that with y'all in this podcast. And that brings us to our first story of Aunt Aggie's Boneyard, which took place just up the road from us here. Aggie Jones was born into slavery sometime in the 1800s. The exact date is lost to time. Her mother was an enslaved African-American woman, her father a Creek Indian. Nothing else is known about them, other than Aggie's mother was owned by the Maddox family from Tantall County, Georgia. In 1844, the Maddoxes moved their household to North Florida, to a town called Alligator, and later known as Lake City. Among that household were Aggie and her husband Jinx Jones, who were counted as house slaves and called by family Aunt Aggie and Uncle Jinx. After emancipation, the couple continued to work for the Maddox family, and later Aunt Aggie took up housekeeping at the Cathy boarding house. By 1883, 18 years after the end of the Civil War, Aunt Aggie purchased a plot of land in the neighborhood known as Black Bottom, so called by whites in the community after the good dark soil and for the skin color of its inhabitants. This is where Aunt Aggie began the garden of her dreams. She wove together her African and Native American heritage into more than just a garden. It was a work of art. Aunt Aggie and her two sons would wander the nearby woods and roads looking for carcasses and animal skeletons. Why would she do that, you might ask? Well, the bones made for good fertilizer, but under Aggie's hands they became more than just nutrients for her plants. She would shape the long and short bones into pillars, arches, and trellises. Before long, her plants, decorative, medicinal, and edible alike, were climbing those remnants of death and bursting with life. Aggie named it her boneyard. Soon, Aunt Aggie's Boneyard became known far and wide. It attracted visitors from all over. Many of Florida's earliest tourists made it a point to stop and see Aunt Aggie's Boneyard. People would hang on her every word as she wove stories for her visitors. She was also known to do a bit of fortune-telling and palm reading. The Boneyard around Halloween also drew in some of the local white children, who would rent the animal skulls and wear them as masks. I'm sure that would have been something to see. Aunt Aggie was described as having very Indian-like features. She was often seen wearing a loose jacket, full flowing skirt, layers of beaded necklaces, bracelets from wrist to elbow, and rings on every finger. On occasion, she was known to don buckskins to do her hunting, foraging, and bone-searching missions. She wore her hair done up in many braids, interwoven with colorful bits of cloth and string. Aunt Aggie was a character of her own making, and she herself might have been as much as an attraction as was her garden. Aunt Aggie reigned over her garden for nearly 2 decades. The Boneyard was a site for courting couples looking for a place to hide from prying eyes, a place where travelers took their rest and caught a glimpse of the Old South and the workings of a native. Some say Aunt Aggie was also known to dole out home remedies to her neighbors and was a healer. The way her garden was described and the success she garnered, it's not hard for me to believe that Aunt Aggie was maybe a little bit more than magic. In her remaining years, she was able to live a fairly comfortable life from the tips she collected from her boneyard guests and from her lively trade in flowers and vegetables. It's estimated that Aggie was well over 90 at her death in 1918. The boneyard was left alone, and without Aggie there to tend and care for it, it withered and died. Aggie's home also fell into disrepair, and the whole lot was demolished in 1928 and became a blacks-only high school in the Jim Crow South. I'd like to think Aunt Aggie would have approved of a school, a place of learning being built over top of her beloved boneyard. And that was Aunt Aggie's boneyard. I'd like to give a big thank you to Dr. Chris Esing, who is a local historian here in Lake City, Florida. We'll probably be hearing a lot from him throughout this podcast, as he is a world of knowledge. Also, I'd like to add a couple of side notes about Aunt Aggie and what life was like for her here in the rural South post-Civil War. She walked a fine line. I mean, she was making her way in a white world and was a black businesswoman. She was very successful, but was able to fly under the radar well enough where she was able to maintain that success and not have it taken from her by a white person. It's important that we keep these sorts of stories alive and honor her creativity and her ingenuity. It's something to be proud of. Thank you for listening to this very first episode. Hopefully there's many, many more to come. Be sure to follow us on social media. Just look for Lore of the South. We've got an Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You'll also be able to see pictures of Aunt Aggie there. I've got several to post. It's quite a sight to see. Give us a follow, 5 stars and a review. This is the first one, so be gentle. Thank y'all for tuning in. It's been fun and a huge learning curve. Thank you for joining us for Lore of the South. Talk to you soon.